be speaking to journalist Tom Grundy, who was at the latest protests and witnessed injuries to activists and police. Police in Hong Kong have clashed with crowds of pro-democracy protesters who were trying to surround the headquarters of government. At least 40 people were arrested. It was some of the worst violence since Hong Kong's pro-democracy protest began 2 months ago. It's time now for a look at what's making news on social media with Matt Cargill and News Exchange.
There have been major scuffles in Hong Kong between riot police and activists calling for free elections. This image has been posted on Twitter by the South China Morning Post. It reports a man believed to be a police officer is stretchered away from the scene of the clashes. Injuries have been reported on both sides. Video has been shared online showing police moving in on protesters outside government headquarters. Activists have been moved along to the main protest site where tens of thousands of people have gathered in support of free elections.
Police battling thousands of pro-democracy protesters. The activists were trying to surround the government headquarters and hundreds of riot police used batons and pepper spray to break up the crowds. The flare-up comes after 4 nights of clashes in the working class district of Mong Kok.
And this is the scene now in downtown Hong Kong, where it's now just after 3:40 in the afternoon, and looking quiet there, but the numbers have grown again, Eliza.
Yes, and it's interesting that we saw this really flare up before, and yet this time it seems to be a new sort of vigour amongst the protesters and a bit of a change of tone from the police as well. Certainly more violence in this round of protests.
Well, let's find out more about this round of the clashes. We're joined via Skype by Hong Kong-based journalist Tom Grundy. Tom, good evening to you there. Why did these protests flare up again?
Hi, Scott. Well, it's been a long night of unrest near the government headquarters in Hong Kong. To answer your question, I think it's a result of the deadlock within the movement in deciding what to do next and whether to escalate and occupy other areas, and a deadlock with the students and the government who have not budged on this issue.
So can you tell us about the sentiment within the group? Is there some splits now in the sort of the overall strategy about where to take this protest movement?
Well, it's long been said to be a leaderless movement, so people are communicating often on WhatsApp, on Facebook groups, on online forums. But some have suggested that this seemed to be an effort to provoke police to clear the site. But a couple of days ago, student leaders invited protesters to convene at the main Occupy site, and it was then revealed late last night that they would try to surround government headquarters to paralyse its operations till demands for political reforms were met.
Tom, you've been covering this event almost from the get-go, or indeed from the get-go, so a couple of months now. By comparison, just how intense, indeed how violent were the events overnight?
Well, there's been a lot of unrest, traditionally more at the Mong Kok site, which was cleared last week. So it's much rarer to see such scenes at the main Admiralty site. Key pedestrian entrances were blocked to government headquarters, escalators and footbridges barricaded. And there was a flare-up this morning, one of the angriest scenes I've seen. Protesters surrounded 3 plainclothes officers. There were 7,000 police deployed overnight, 4,000 around this main Admiralty Occupy site. Protesters were wearing goggles and helmets, dragging barricades into a key underpass just behind government headquarters. And I understand there's been at least 45 arrests with a lot of pepper spray and batons deployed.
And Tom, I assume, obviously, looking at these pictures, that this is really taking over Hong Kong again, more broadly.
Well, it's happening in very specific places around the government complex. There is a smaller camp in Causeway Bay, which seems to be relatively peaceful, but there were other gatherings in Mong Kok too. Obviously, it's on quite a wide highway and a key thoroughfare, so it's causing a lot of transport inconvenience. But many believe this is being drawn out because the courts, through injunctions, or the police through force, are being applied to a political problem that needs a wider solution.
Tom, you just mentioned the transportation inconvenience a moment ago. For those not directly involved in the protests, in other words, for most Hong Kong residents, how do they feel about the ongoing protests?
Well, the idea of universal suffrage, one person, one vote, is relatively uncontroversial in post-colonial Hong Kong. There's a 30-year democracy movement here, but recent surveys by Hong Kong University have shown that support has been waning for at least the occupation. So it's unclear how Hong Kongers will react to these latest pictures.
And what about China?
Well, obviously, it seems that it is out of Hong Kong's hands, this issue, and many protesters know and admit that China is very unlikely to budge on its plan for universal suffrage in 2017 in Hong Kong, whereby they're allowing three pre-selected candidates to stand. But student leaders in recent weeks have said that if they were to give up these occupation camps, they would have no leverage with the government. But as for any sort of crackdown of the kind that you often see in China, I think that's quite unlikely, as the police here are well equipped. They have one of the highest police-to-citizen ratios in the world. So they're probably able to handle the situation. And the chief executive, C.Y. Leung, has said that they have been very tolerant.
And what's the likelihood of further unrest into the afternoon, or as it comes late afternoon there in Hong Kong and into the evening?
Well, you do often see numbers at the protest camps increase as people get off work. But as I left a few hours ago, people were very exhausted and they were resting, regrouping, and tidying the protest site where there's been a lot of debris. And now it seems that people are back to square one in terms of the territory they hold around that key site at government headquarters.
Tom Grundy in Hong Kong, thank you very much for bringing us up to date.
Thank you.